welcome to Race Talk with Lane and Eugene. This is our next to last session in our series. We will resume in January. Thank you for being here. My name is Reverend Lane Cobb. I'm here with my co-host, Reverend Eugene Holden. And our guest today is Ms. Heather Cronk. And I am just going to read Heather's brief bio, and then I'm going to let her kind of introduce herself and give her the floor. Ms. Heather Cronk serves as Managing Director of Care in Action and Political Organizing Director for the National Domestic Workers Alliance. Prior to joining the team at CIA NDWA, Heather served as National Co-Director of Showing Up for Racial Justice, which is SURJ, where she focused her organizing work on creating a grassroots network committed to undermining white support for white supremacy. Heather hails mostly from Kentucky and lived all over the Southeast before moving to Maryland, which she's now called home for nearly 14 years. She graduated from Berry College in Georgia and Wake Forest University Divinity School in North Carolina. She is a founder of the Asylum Seekers Sponsorship Project, serves on the boards of Faithful America and RISE. That's spelled R-H-I-Z-E. Serves on the core team of an emerging project to launch a truth and reconciliation process in the US and enjoys sharing a glass of bourbon with other organizers. And I'm absolutely happy to introduce to you this afternoon, Ms. Heather Cronk. Heather, welcome.
Thanks, Lane. Thank you, Lane and Eugene, for inviting me to join the call today. I'm so excited to see so many people, so many faces. Really excited to dig in with y'all today. So before I do that, I'm going to share my screen in a little bit. I have some slides to run through, mostly just to hold myself accountable for not talking for an hour. Mostly to make sure that I'm moving through and that we're creating a bunch of space on the call for conversation. But before that, just wanted to share a little bit more about who I am. Lane mentioned I'm originally from Kentucky and other parts of the Southeast. I've lived in Georgia, North Carolina, Alabama, and have been in Maryland for 14 going on 15 years, and know Lane through our common membership at the Open Church of Maryland, which is pastored by my professor and the person who I served as a research advisor for, Brad Braxton, who we know each other from Wake Forest Divinity School. So super excited to be with you today, and glad that folks are continuing to join. So we'll just welcome folks in as they continue to join us. And our topic for today is it's a complicated one. It's a really big topic. So we're gonna be talking about two things that are related and that intersect a good deal. One is we're going to be talking about truth and reconciliation. And we're going to be talking about that through the lens of rebuilding communities. And what I'm going to talk about mostly is actually my experience organizing in Charlottesville, Virginia, with the community there, leading up to the racialized violence that happened in August of 2017, but also telling a little bit of history about that community and how the violence that happened there in August is actually reflective of a much longer story that's true for Charlottesville and I think true for most of our communities. So I'll be kind of talking about rebuilding and truth and reconciliation through the lens of telling a community story. It's one that I feel really honored to be able to tell, and I feel really grateful for being invited into that community to organize with them. And what was a really particularly violent and traumatic summer that has also led to some really beautiful community building and really beautiful organizing. So I'm going to share my screen, and we'll get into it. Let me. Why am I not seeing present on here? Oh, we'll just keep moving. Okay. Oh, here.
Upper right-hand corner, right there.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, here we go. All right, so we're gonna start our journey in Charlottesville. And as I said, you know, Charlottesville has kind of has a reputation, has a brand as kind of a small town, kind of small town Americana. This is Main Street in Charlottesville. And so the kind of story that has kind of emerged in the ether around Charlottesville over the past couple of years since 2017 was, you know, this kind of sleepy town with a real community feel, with a, you know, pretty typical like historic Main Street. And all of a sudden, violence erupted. So that's kind of like the mainstream media version of this story. But there's a long backstory to Charlottesville and how that violence erupted and why that violence erupted. And I think the questions that I'm really interested in getting into today is, you know, kind of how a community rebuilds after that kind of violence erupts. And there have been way too many communities, in fact, most communities that have seen some kind of racialized violence, not just in the past couple of years, but over decades and centuries. So there are very few communities that have escaped racialized violence. And so, you know, how do we rebuild after that happens? And how do we do that rebuilding together from a systemic perspective? So really treating the eruption of violence or the onset of violence as one part of a longer story rather than just an exception to the rule or an aberration. And then I'm super interested in talking through with folks, you know, kind of everyone's, you know, y'all's thoughts on how community members can learn to trust one another, especially after violence erupts in a community, and maybe trust each other for the first time. So what we saw in Charlottesville was that the violence that erupted there in August 2017 really kind of ripped the Band-Aid off of a whole lot of distrust that had been building for many, many years. It had just been ignored by most of white Charlottesville and very, very real for most of Black Charlottesville. So, so just to, you know, kind of get us into the mindset of this particular story. Charlottesville, as I said, kind of has established a brand as, you know, a hip small college town, but it's also the home of Thomas Jefferson, who has a complicated history, a complicated story, both serving as the father, one of the fathers of U.S. democracy, and also an unapologetic slave owner. He settled in Charlottesville. He not only established the University of Virginia, but really kind of established the culture of the town. So it is, the town very much sees itself as kind of a scholarly haven and a place that kind of birthed the person who birthed U.S. democracy. But the town's history is a whole lot more complicated than that. So not only was it the home of Thomas Jefferson, but it's also a place of really intense racial discord. And that was kind of most visibly cemented into the town's history with the erection of a giant Robert E. Lee statue in 1924, so only 100 years ago. So, you know, after the Civil War and Jim Crow and a history that we all probably know fairly well. Not only was this statue erected, really, it's like 4 blocks from from Town Hall. So it's 4 blocks from kind of the center of town. But it was erected to cheering crowds and Klan parades. And I'm happy to send out these links afterwards, but there's a great website called The Illusion of Progress that tracks the Klan's influence in Charlottesville over the 19th and 20th centuries. And that, I mean, you can see on that website, it's a really stark reminder of how unabashed the Klan's presence was, not just in Charlottesville, but in the area. There were tons of recruitment flyers that not only were kind of distributed around town, but actually printed in the local newspaper, the Daily Progress. So the Daily Progress actually helped the Klan recruit by printing their flyers as full-page ads in the newspaper. And then one of the things that really really cemented racial strife in Charlottesville was the decision by the city council in the early 1960s, in 1960 and 61, there was kind of a white section of Charlottesville and a black section of Charlottesville. Again, something that many of us are very familiar with. The black section of Charlottesville was called Vinegar Hill. And the city council decided to just bulldoze Vinegar Hill. And the reasoning around that was that the city council wanted to make way for progress. They wanted to make way for white businesses, for white housing, to make sure that professors who were coming in, students who were coming into the University of Virginia had all of the resources that they could want or that they could need. And the price was bulldozing the main kind of black thoroughfare in Charlottesville. So Charlottesville is no stranger to kind of racial violence, whether that's happening in the streets or it's happening in city council. And then just to bring us up to the present, again, you know, the kind of mainstream media narrative around Charlottesville in 2017 was, oh my God, all of a sudden, these, you know, Nazis descended on this little town out of nowhere. And actually it wasn't out of nowhere. The year before, in 2016, there were a couple of really important things that happened in Charlottesville. One was the vice mayor of the city council, Wes Bellamy, who's a black man, made an announcement at a press conference in front of the Robert E. Lee statue that the statue would come down, that he was taking responsibility in his role on the city council to get rid of that statue. The same month, a high school student, a black woman named Zy Bryant, created an online petition also to pressuring the city council, asking the city council to remove the statue, since she and her friends, young people in the community, young people of color in the community, really saw the statue as a reminder of a sort of past Charlottesville that was offensive, that was violent, and it was a constant reminder that they were seen as less than. And so the city council actually took that up. They established a commission in May 2016 to explore the removal of the statue. And then in January 2017, the council made the decision to take down the statue and to sell it. And part of what they would do, or what they would do with the money from that statue, in addition to other money from the city budget, was they also passed a reform package. Some people called it an equity package. What it was actually designed to be was a reparations package. And they took, it was about $4 million total. And they decided to put that $4 million into an African-American Heritage Center in Charlottesville to really make sure that folks were learning the Black history of Charlottesville and the contributions of Black residents. $250,000 into one of the parks in one of the predominantly Black areas of Charlottesville. $2.5 million into public housing redevelopment, which actually $2.5 million is not nearly what was needed in the public housing development, but it's still a good chunk of money. And then some other money to go to educational equity and educational access. And so while many folks kind of think of Charlottesville and think of what happened there as being sparked by the statue and controversy over the statue, what actually was the spark was this reparations package, which is important in the context of a conversation about truth and reconciliation. So of course, progress leads to response. And in March 2017, just 2 months later, it was actually less than 2 months later, some local residents in Charlottesville filed a lawsuit to reinstate the statue. And it's become this really intense back and forth within the court system I think that they named their group, I think it was Friends of Statues, or it kind of turned into a defense of Confederate statues, not only in Charlottesville, but actually across Virginia. And so March 2017, there was a lawsuit, and then right-wing activists really kind of took it from there. So there was kind of a segment of the population, segment of the community that went the court route, and then there was a segment of the community that went a pretty violent route. So in May of 2017, two men, Richard Spencer and Jason Kessler, who had both graduated from the University of Virginia, they were both products of that community, organized an alt-right rally at the statue, and really went after the city council members, especially Wes Bellamy, very, very hard. They started calling Vice Mayor Bellamy anti-white. They would show up to city councils armed, because Virginia is an open carry state, in order to try to intimidate city council members, particularly Black city council members, and really sort of like started building, not only building like recruitment within their ranks, but also building a national profile. A couple months later, 2 months later, there was a Klan rally, again at the statue. The statue became the symbolic centerpiece of this struggle in Charlottesville over justice or injustice. So the statue was really kind of the place that people continued to descend for rallies. And that particular rally turned pretty violent when the police, the local police department from Charlottesville, CPD, allowed Klan members to park in a city parking garage. And then when they were done, and then escorted them to the statue, to their rally. And then when the rally was done, escorted them back to the parking garage, and then escorted them out of the garage. As soon as the Klan was out of the garage, then the police started tear gassing the anti-racist activists who had shown up to counter protest. And so then that sparked all of the turmoil around August 11th and 12th, which is when these same organizers, Spencer and Kessler, organized a Unite the Right rally, which I'm sure everyone has seen and heard about, which turned very violent very quickly. One anti-racist activist was killed, but there were many other Black community members who were not only violently attacked, but who were then themselves charged with assault. Fortunately, those charges ended up being dismissed, but the charges alone then went on folks' records. They had to take time off of work to go to court. It was a really pretty horrific kind of piece of the puzzle that the community had to deal with. But what came out of August 12th, what came out of that particular, what some folks call like Summer of Hate, was actually some really beautiful organizing. And this is what I want to get into around like how a community rebuilds after it's experienced violence. So right after August 12th, I think we actually set it up on August 13th. We set up a Charlottesville Community Resilience Fund that, because Charlottesville had been in the news and everyone was talking about it, and everyone wanted to find a way to help, we directed that help into this resilience fund, which then continued to function for another year after August 12th and literally just helped people pay bills. It was only open to folks of color who lived in Charlottesville. And it was like, I was like delivering cash to people to help pay bills, or like paying an internet bill, paying a light bill. It was literally just, there's so many people, so many, especially Black folks in Charlottesville, who are just like on the brink of losing their home, or like having to deal with traffic tickets that prevent them from being able to drive. Like, we were able to funnel all of that money that came in to help the community into the places where it was most needed. And then the other really beautiful thing, or another really beautiful thing that came out of that, was the community set up a community safety team. So when there were, kind of like, the community continued to be terrorized by, groups of right-wing activists who would kind of come to town because they wanted to see the statue, and they would wear MAGA hats, and they would walk around armed, and really just wanted to kind of exact threats upon the community. The community set up a community safety team to be able to respond to those, to be able to provide support when it was needed, provide help when it was needed, and defend the community. And then in November 2017, just a couple of months after August, the Charlottesville community elected a local Black activist, Nakia Walker, to the city council. And in Charlottesville, the city council members actually named the mayor. So the city council named Nakia mayor. And that has really shifted a lot of things within the community, having someone who comes out of the community, who isn't a professional politician, who has done a lot of local housing activism herself. That has really been able to shift the way the community has been together, and has really helped folks to rebuild trust. And I love this quote from Nakia, where she says, so many people wanted us to just go back to normal after August. Just like, how quickly can we just go back to normal and forget this ever happened? And, she says, the normal for Black, Hispanic, and low-income white folks in this city isn't actually a normal they want to return to, right? So it's an invitation. Her position as mayor, it was an invitation to reimagine what our normal might look like. And so just to kind of wrap up the Charlottesville piece and then get into kind of the meat of our conversation today around truth, reconciliation, and reparations. The statues continue to be lightning rods. They're actually the cases that the Friends of Statues folks have taken into court are being heard in the Virginia Supreme Court now. So we anticipate that whenever we don't know when those decisions will be made, but we anticipate that there will be, continued right-wing attention on the community when that happens. And then local organizers are actually exploring this conversation about how to really undertake a serious truth and reconciliation process, right? How to really invite the community to grapple with its history. With the beautiful parts of its history and the really troublesome parts of its history. And that's, in so many ways, that's actually the question in front of all of us, right? Like how do we wrestle with our own family's history, our own community's history, that, this kind of racialized violence isn't unique to Charlottesville. It's not unique to the South. And that's, I think, a really important. People who don't live in the South often sort of, as a Southerner, sort of like look down on the South and say, well, we're not them. And actually, there were several iterations of the Klan. The first was a real Southern one. The third was a real Southern one. But the second was a really national iteration of the Klan, where there was not a state in the U.S. Where there was not a local, local Klan activity. So the question in front of Charlottesville is the question that's in front of all of us, which is, what is the new chapter that we want to write? And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about what truth and reconciliation might look like. And then there are actually two really, I think, really exciting projects that are in motion right now, kind of about to launch, that I also want to invite folks to get more involved in. So what I've laid out here is sort of a little bit of a map around like what I've seen as ways that truth, reconciliation, and reparations might unfold. So the first step is a reckoning. And in Charlottesville, there was a reckoning around statues that kind of, again, like ripped off the Band-Aid of a much, much bigger reckoning that needed to happen in that town. But we've also seen reckonings, you know, what happened in this summer when George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis was about George Floyd, and it was about much, much more in that community. And there was a really serious reckoning around what the history of racialized violence was and has been and continues to be in Minneapolis. A lot of communities are going through that reckoning, but a lot of them actually stop short of the reconciliation, right? Of the, like, what did we actually do here? And how do we grapple with our history and reconcile that with who we want to be, who we want this community to be? And then there has to be some element of repair, right? There can't just be a reckoning and a reconciliation. There has to be some method to repair harms. A lot of folks talk about that repair in terms of reparations, right? Reparations is the noun version of repairing something. So whether that's monetary reparations or more systemic reparations, there are a whole lot of ways that communities can actually engage in that repair process, that reparation process. And then the fourth piece here I think is really, really important to think about and to not let go of, which is resilience, which is making sure that the reckoning, the reconciliation, and the repair actually hold, right? That you've done enough deep work and you've dug deeply enough that process actually holds, that the process and the community is resilient. And so just to throw out some ideas for what this might look like and what, you know, what various truth and reconciliation projects are talking about right now. There are a couple different ways that this could look. There may be truth and reconciliation circles where folks have, you know, real, honest, you know, small group conversations that explore a community's history and then seek out ways to repair harm that was caused. You could imagine truth and reconciliation commissions inside institutions, right? So colleges and universities, a couple of them have started doing this. Local school systems, churches and synagogues, other communities of faith. There are all kinds of ways in which film studios and music companies are benefiting from Black brilliance, but not actually paying Black artists. So there are all kinds of ways, banks and farms and parks, that could actually, again, have these conversations about being honest about harm that has been caused and being honest about like real histories, and then figuring out how to repair those relationships. And then this is a thing that has been kind of bandied about in Congress for a while now, which is a National Truth and Reconciliation Commission. There's a bill in the House that has been introduced year after year after year that unfortunately has never gotten anywhere, but it would actually set up a National Truth and Reconciliation Commission, somewhat similar to what South Africa went through after apartheid, that would actually like really dig into a national process, a national truth, reconciliation, and reparations process. And there are all kinds of ways that that could look, and ways to involve various communities across the country. But I'm excited that there, I'm excited about the possibility of what that could look like. And then this is my last slide, and then I'm gonna stop talking. I've been talking for too long, and really get into some, I have some kind of questions to jog us, but really want to get into a conversation. So there's a project that I'm part of called, we don't have a name, we just called it Project Truth and Reconciliation for right now. But you can find out more about that project at projecttruthandrec.org. And that really is an effort. We're trying to build the infrastructure that can support a movement around truth, reconciliation, and reparations. So that it's not just one piece of legislation, it's not just one community, but there's a real movement of folks across the country who are calling for truth, reconciliation, and reparations. And then there's another project that I'm not involved with directly, but really excited about, called Land Back, that's specific to it. It's hosted by a collective called NDN Collective that is Indigenous activists. And it's really an effort to give land back to Indigenous communities and tribes that were robbed of land over the course of 400 years. And they actually just launched this fall. They've been doing some really exciting work, but that's another way that you can get involved in a concrete way in a movement for truth and reconciliation. And then these are just some questions that I was hoping that we could dig into. I'm super interested in hearing what folks, have you thought about truth and reconciliation before? What could this look like in your community? Are you interested in doing something like this in your community? What would it look like to do that? What kind of potential positive responses do you think you have? What kind of potential negative responses do you think you'd have? But I'm super excited to just open up the conversation and see where we go.
Lovely. Thank you, Heather. You're just such a rock star. So thrilled for you to be here. Carol has raised her hand. I'm going to just let you guys take it away because given the time that we have, I think that's the best thing to do. Carol, go ahead, honey.
Thank you. Thanks, Heather. That my stepson and his husband moved to Charlottesville about 6 months before all this started, and we're concerned about if they were in the right place or not, but it's good there now for them. I live in Rochester, New York, and we had, I don't know if you've heard of Daniel Prude, and my pastor, Myra Brown. We have a group called Spark, and we're working on a civil rights heritage park. And in the neighborhood that it's in, we're working with the residents of that zip code to get them involved with their own area, not just like swoop in and do stuff. As a matter of fact, we're just starting a big thing here in a couple weeks, but you and Myra should hook up. We're working on a civil rights heritage park, and a lot for the neighborhood that needs it.
Yeah, that's great. There are several initiatives similar to that have been birthed out of the work that Brian Stevenson has done with the National Lynching Memorial, where folks have either visited the memorial or connected online and are trying to retell the stories of their communities. And it sounds like there's rich history in Rochester.
Yes, and we had a group go do a race convoy a couple years ago, and they wrote a book, and so Spark has been around for several years, but this big push has come, especially since the race convoy has visited all these places down south. So, yeah.
Can I ask a question about that, Heather, please? Thanks, Carol. When projects like that, projects like a heritage park, I'm interested to find out what difference do you feel that actually makes, right? Does it funnel money in, or is it just like this thing that's a symbolic something that's pretty good? What are you thinking about that, Heather? What's your experience?
Yeah. I mean, that can be done really well and really poorly, right? So, I mean, here in Maryland, there's actually a really great trail and series of historic displays in a museum following the Underground Railroad through Maryland. And that's actually been something that, like, I've been to the museum a couple of times, and it stops on the trails. I think that they've done a great job of uplifting histories that have not been talked about, and really uplifting the folks who were conductors along the railroad. And the state of Maryland has really embraced it and has done, like, they've treated it as a tourist opportunity. So it's been an interesting, like, I think that they've done a good job of it, and like certainly the communities around it, Cambridge and others have taken advantage of it and really built a tourist industry around it. And then actually in Charlottesville, one of the leaders of the Black Lives Matter chapter in Charlottesville is also a professor of history and religion at UVA. And she's done she's put together a really cool like alternative history tour through Charlottesville, where she kind of like goes to all of these stops along the way that have been uplifted as tourist stops, and tells the alternative history of what actually happened in that area. And so that's also been a really cool, she's gotten some great traction from it. I've gone on her tour. It's really well done. So there are like great ways that you can do it. And there are also like super terrible ways that you can do it. So yeah, there's a spectrum.
Yeah, we're not doing just like statues. This is going to be interactive for school kids, and they're only interviewing architects who are local and people of color, and a lot of planning. We still have to raise a lot of money yet, but we're working on it.
Thanks, Carol. Lynn?
Tyrone?
Hi, Tyrone, do you want to go and then I'll go? You had
Go
your
ahead,
hand
Lynn.
up first.
Always yield to the.
Okay, thank you. So Heather, really, really good presentation. Thank you so much for it. So I'm in Oakland, California, and in response to one of your questions about our community and how would they react, my question to you is, generally with the Truth and Reconciliation councils that are being formed, are they generally around an issue or a concern like Charlottesville that happened? Or have you seen them starting just because it's something that needs to be done?
Yeah, I've seen both happen. The like classic example in the U.S. of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission was Greensboro, after the Greensboro massacre in the early 80s, where there was a Klan rally and several white, black and white anti-racist activists were killed. And then Greensboro, the town of Greensboro, as a result of that, went through a pretty substantial Truth and Reconciliation process. It hasn't actually finished yet. So it's been, 30 years of a process. But that was because of a kind of firecracker event. And then you have processes like Asheville, North Carolina, that they've recently started going through a truth and reconciliation process with the goal of moving toward a reparations process as well. And that was, or is, it's in some ways in response to violence, but it's more like we know that there have been patterns, since the institution of this town. And we want to, it's not necessarily be proactive, because there have been incidents of racial violence, especially by the police. But it has been a little bit more, it hasn't been quite the like firecracker event and then they go into a process. So I think it's both, but certainly like having a trigger event is usually what gets people's attention and usually what leads to some sort of process and results.
So if you are in a community that, we have trigger events all the time as far as with the police, but not something like huge, like what happened in many cities. Mm-hmm. Would there be a way, or how would you recommend that we would get started with a commission? Yeah,
that's actually, Project Truth and Reconciliation is trying to figure that out right now. So we don't have a model set up for that at the moment. We're working on putting a model together. But I think the hope is that folks do embrace that kind of process before you get to a trigger event, so that it's not, what we are trying to build is a sustainable movement, not just we're going to get out into the streets now and then tomorrow we're going to forget about it, which is what most white folks do. So like we're hugely sympathetic in the moment and then we kind of forget about that after 2 or 3 days. So I do think that creating a framework for a process that's not necessarily triggered by a specific violent event actually helps the sustainability of that process moving forward.
If I may, so I like the South African model that you were mentioning earlier. I remember reading about it, and I think this is an aside. One of the most powerful things I remember from that is after people just owned up to the terrible things that they had done, that there was this huge reservoir of forgiveness. It was just amazing. And I remember that distinctly, how, it was like, okay, like we get it, you acknowledge it, we forgive it. So I think that's a component in that piece that you designed that I think is critical, that has to, hopefully will be the byproduct, the outcome, right, of that. But my concern is this, is the narrative. There are multiple narratives going on in this country right now, which has always been the case. So this is nothing new, right? But particularly now, I think more so than ever. So you have two basically different groups that have two different realities in terms of what they see. Not true, that's just all black and white, no pun intended. There's gray areas that are in there. But still, that's a factor. So when we talk about reconciliation, you almost have to have a certain mindset just to get to that point. To talk about that. Right. So that's really one of my major concerns. And like you said, the sympathy in the moment is great, and then it goes away and we go back to whatever we call normal, quote unquote. But guess what? The pandemic is not shit. Mix that stuff up. Let me change my language a little bit. Shook it up big time. So now we're looking at things, I think, through a slightly different lens, which is not a bad thing. I think it is a good thing where we are now. But I am concerned about flipping that narrative, how to get there, how many people have to die before we're able to see that clearly. I was thinking about what Lynn just said. Well, we had a whole movie on the BART station that was done, about a young man who was killed on the BART station. So those are influential things, right? We got to change the mindset. I get that. But to hit it directly, which is what we're talking about doing, reconciliations and reparations, that's looking at it straight up, no chasing. So I'm just curious your thoughts about that. And to me, that's the big hump to a certain extent to get over. It's just to acknowledge what has occurred without white guilt and all that crazy stuff that people don't want to feel.
Well, and Virginia, I see you. Just my quick response on that is you also have, like, what we're trying to do with the Truth and Reconciliation Project is create a model that also isn't like forcing people to reconcile who don't actually want to reconcile, right? So you can't actually say, okay, well, this community's good, right? If like not everyone in that community has opted in. And you also can't necessarily wait for everyone in the community to be like, okay, I'm good. So there is gray area in like, what's the threshold? How do we measure whether a community has reconciled? And I think that's a really tough piece that I don't know the answer to, but I have a lot of curiosity about. Go on, Virginia.
Yeah, so I'm thinking back to the reparations that were done in 2016 in Charlottesville. Were those rushed? Was it something that didn't have enough buy-in from the white community? And that's what became the spark? And so what should we learn from that? How do we go about doing reparations in a way that isn't going to become the spark?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. There was not a truth and reconciliation process before that reparations package moved. And so there was disagreement. There was, the city council vote was unanimous. Whether all city council members really felt like really backed that process, really backed that package, I think is up for debate. Because then what you saw afterwards was a lot of hand wringing and a lot, when right-wing folks came into the community, especially came into city council meetings and started pushing back, there were a lot of white city council members who were like, no, but a lot of equivocating that happened. And so I do think that some element of a truth and reconciliation process is important for a community to go through, partially in order to get that buy-in for then what you do eventually in a really concrete reparations way.
Thank you.
I can't see thumbnails. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you have something else to say, Virginia? But I do see that Amy has her hand up. Eugene, do you see? Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too. Amy, if you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I was just wondering, the state of Maryland is actually the first state in the nation to set up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission about lynching. And I was just wondering, it was passed unanimously by the legislature, and I was just wondering whether you have any updates on how that is going.
Yeah, I was trying to type back to you in the chat, and then there were so many good questions that I couldn't finish. Yeah, it seems like that project is going well. What I've been sort of like itching for, and I haven't been very closely attached to it. I've just been kind of watching from the outside. But what I'm really kind of itching for is the more like concrete processes. I think there've been a lot of presentations and a lot of like movie screenings and that kind of stuff, which is great education. It actually speaks to that piece that Virginia just brought up around the political education that needs to happen in order to build buy-in, in order to then do the concrete repair. So I've been encouraged by what Will and that crew have been doing in order to lay the groundwork. And I'm really itching for the like, okay, what comes next? Where can we move into action?
Yeah, I gathered that the commission is supposed to come up with some kind of recommendation. They have like a timeline that was set up by the legislation. So.
Yeah, I don't know what that.
You live in Maryland, so you haven't heard about this, or you haven't been involved. So.
Yeah, no, I need to look at what the timeline is, because I think it should be coming up soon.
Yeah, good.
Michelle, I see your hand, and then Damon.
Thank you. Am I muted or unmuted?
You're good.
I'm good. Hi. Oh gosh, there's so much that's spinning around in my head, but I keep feeling without defending and dealing with reparations, reconciliation, truth, that if we're not all supporting Native Americans who internationally have always been screwed, colonized, and set the standards for how we kill, abuse, and take over, I don't think we're dealing with the depth. I think we're letting ourselves all off the hook, and that pains me greatly, because I think a lot of people are frightened by the idea of taking back land. It's like, hey, you know, my entire city's built on this. So I don't know where to begin, and I would love to hear other people's ideas, heartfelt ideas, because I could use some of that right now. Thank you.
Heather, what's your take on that?
Yeah, that's why I'm actually I'm really excited about the Project Truth and Reconciliation, which is led by Black and Indigenous folks, and then also Land Back, which is Indigenous led, and neither of those, like Land Back isn't necessarily saying like we want to take back all the land that was originally ours, right? I mean, maybe some folks are saying that or thinking that, but I think for the most part, it's like there were treaties that were signed, and we just want those to be honored, right? So, so I think a lot of what Land Back is trying to do is to say, like, actually, this country signed some paperwork with us, and we want that to be honored. And then, you know, there are certainly also, Land Back has already started receiving donations of land. So there are some people who are like, either I live on this land and I don't feel great about it, and so I'm going to donate that back. Or I think more often, people own swaths of land, and they are donating that back to the original inhabitants of the land. So I think there are actually a bunch of different ways that can look, and a bunch of different asks that are being made. And it's not necessarily, we don't have to swing for the fences and like hit a home run the first time out. You know, you can also do a lot of, you know, like donating to groups that represent tribes and people who are originally on the land that you occupy. And so there are a bunch of different ways that we can do that, small and large. Eventually we need to get to large, but I think, you know, doing something small in the meantime doesn't hurt anyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Heather. I'm hearing a lot about Charlottesville with the city council and the people. How much of a part is the University of Virginia, since they are a big part of Charlottesville, probably the biggest part, how much of a part are they playing in all of this that's going on there? Because I don't hear their name much, you know, and I know as a University of Virginia, it's a very, very, you know, big university, especially in that area.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So there are a couple different answers to that. One is there have been some professors, particularly Black professors, but not entirely, who have used their platforms to really call on the university to take action. So whether that's like a UVA specific Truth and Reconciliation Commission that's attached to university specific reparations, or any number of other things, there have been some faculty who have been great. There have been a whole lot of faculty who have done not a damn thing. And so like there's a very small slice who have been very active and vocal, and then a whole lot who have been very, very quiet. There have also been students who have been at the front lines from the very beginning. So there were a lot of UVA students who have really organized, who were on the front lines in May and July and August, who have done some really powerful work to organize their own fellow students. The administration has not been great. The administration had, for a long time, the administration just sort of was ignoring that this was a thing that was happening. They have recently felt the pressure to say a little bit more. I think they might have established a scholarship fund or something like that, but there has definitely not been an institution-wide process, or really even an institution-wide recognition. So they continue, students continue to pressure, alumni continue to pressure. There was an effort to try to get UVA to revoke the degrees from Richard Spencer and Jason Kessler. They wouldn't do that. So the administration really has a long way left to go.
Thank you.
Heather, Selma asked a question in the chat I want to ask. It's a great question. What will it take to identify all stakeholders in these conversations and to include them? I
Great
know.
question.
Great question.
I don't know the answer.
Right.
I mean, I think
last question. So yes, absolutely.
yeah, I mean, I think that's identification of stakeholders is part of the process, right? It's not a precursor to the process. It is the process. So I think that like as folks are considering, what this might look like in your community, or and as we're considering as a project that's trying to put together a model, like we're considering how you go about doing that. I think the commitment to make sure that everyone is represented has to be a really strong and concrete commitment. And that means, that's why I said to Lynn earlier, like, I don't think that this kind of process is best undertaken as a response to a trigger event, right? It's going to be a long process, a many years long process. And so folks have to be bought into it who understand it's going to take us many years to actually like climb through our community's history and to make sure that everybody's at the table who wants to be.
Thank you. I just want to say, Sue says 30 organizations rallied today under the banner of Decarcerate Hudson Valley in New York State. And she's saying coalitions work. And that I think goes by a little bit about what you were saying there to bring stuff together. That's the hardest thing in the world to do, right? Because everybody's talking at the same time. I don't know. I just kind of would love to hear your take on that. I think we've got literally 3 minutes left.
On do coalitions work?
Coalition building, right? So
Yeah.
I'm a person, I'm not a coalition, right? So how do we kind of go about creating that dialogue and bringing people into the conversation? I know it's happening and I know that's what you're about. Just some little, 1, 2, 3 things that we can do.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I believe in movement. That's why I believe in organizations. You have to do this work in relationship with other people. And organizations is how you do that. So if you're not currently part of a racial justice organization, get in one. Find whatever. There's so many that you can be part of, but join an organization, whether that's a local one or a national one or whatever. That's the difference between doing things on your own and doing things in accountable relationships with other people in your community. That's the difference between transactional work and transformational work, is that you have to be in relationship. Like all of this is dependent on relationships. And so whether that's organizations or coalitions or networks or whatever configuration it is, we all do better when we're working together.
Heather, thank you so very much. And I want to thank everybody who asked some very great questions. We're coming to that time right now. Again, I want to, give a shout out to Heather and bless you for all the work that you're doing, and everybody else who is here as well. As I like to say with Race Talk, the tagline is "Your voice matters." And so as you all keep showing up and as you keep telling people and sharing this work, that we continue to grow, and we continue to put out the invitation to get transactional. I like that, transactional versus transformational. Yeah, I want to work with that. So again, thank you so very much for being on here once again with Race Talk with Lane and Eugene. Next week is where we were closing it out for this particular series, and it's going to be facilitated by some two great people, Lane and Eugene. And we want you to show up, and we're going to ask you all some very hopefully thought-provoking questions about what you've gotten out of this thus far, and what's your part in growing this and making this a world that works, right? Yeah. Is there anything else, Lane, that you want to say before we say goodbye?
I'm so thrilled with this platform. I'm so thrilled with you folks who are supporting this platform in this conversation.
Yeah.
Tyrone said, this is a coalition, right?
Yeah.
So it's like the start of something. And Heather, yes, definitely, if you want to send us some links, I will definitely pass them on. And thank you, my friend. I'm so much the better for having made your acquaintance. And you are absolutely the best. And if there's a way for us to follow you, send me that as well. All right. Everyone.
All right, everybody. Have a fantastic week.